Have you ever watched a TV show or a movie where the villain was very obviously the bad guy? For example, Scar from The Lion King. We're clued in as soon as we see him in a cave by himself speaking in weird whispers. Super creepy, definitely the bad guy. Or what about Darth Vader? Even when I say that name, can't you just get a mental picture of what I'm talking about? The black robe, the mask, the voice. And just like with Scar, the first time we see Darth Vader, he's walking through the smoke with his cape billowing behind him and his heavy breathing, and we know this is the bad guy. The reason these characters are so memorable is because we know exactly who they are the first time we see them. And every other time we see them after that, we get that uh-oh feeling in our gut. The filmmakers do this on purpose. They give us a strong first impression of the bad guys so we know who we're cheering for and who we're cheering against for the rest of the movie. Sometimes though, this happens in real life. Have you ever made a snap judgment about someone? Regardless of whether or not you were right, we've all met people and judged them based on a first impression. Even though life isn't a movie, we all have rotating good guys and bad guys, don't we? And when somebody works their way into your bad guy list, isn't it tough for them to get out? We've made up our mind about that person and boxed them into our idea of who we think they are, and nothing they do can change it. If we're honest, I bet some of us would admit that at some point or another, we've seen God in a similar way, like the bad guy. And maybe there was a time when you saw God or saw him portrayed as angry, mean, or constantly looking to see if you're messing up. Or maybe if you were honest, to you God seems like a distant grandpa in the sky. He's nice, but he's uninterested in what you do or what you're going through. Or maybe your view of God is different now than it used to be. For many people, when we go through seasons of life when we feel like God is the bad guy, it's hard to imagine him in any other way. And that can be challenging because it's hard to pursue an active, growing relationship with God when he seems like the bad guy. But what if, and just go with me here for just a second, what if how we feel about God doesn't always represent what is true about God? Like, what if we're wrong? What if God isn't the bad guy? What if he is more of a loving father than a distant grandfather? How would our faith look different if we had an accurate picture of what God was actually like? Well, in the New Testament of the Bible, we find the book of Luke. Luke does a great job of giving us some insight into what Jesus was going through as he got closer to his death on the cross. On the very night Jesus would be arrested, he asked his disciples to go with him to Gethsemane, a garden at the foot of the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. And once they were there, Luke tells us this is what happened. He, Jesus, withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." You have to remember that Jesus was God, but he was also a man. And as much as you may think that Jesus was a mini-God robot when he was here on earth, he was both fully God and fully human. He didn't like the idea of getting a cup of suffering any more than the rest of us. And like many of us, one of Jesus' first responses was to look upward. But the way Jesus looked up is a little different than the way that we do. I don't know about you, but when things aren't going well or the way that I want them to, I look up because I'm angry at God. If my circumstances aren't what I want, I'm quick to blame God or think that God is punishing me. Too often I'm saying, not your will, but mine be done. Here's the good news about this type of prayer. God can take it. Even when our attitude is terrible, God still wants to hear from us. Isn't that crazy? When I'm at my worst, God still wants me. When I want to blame him, he wants to hear from me. But Jesus did the opposite of what we may want to do. He was in circumstances that the human part of him did not want. Jesus knew his betrayal, arrest, torture, and eventual crucifixion were ahead. And instead of looking up at God and getting mad or blaming him for putting this impossible burden on his shoulders, Jesus prayed with truth and trust. While you and I may be quick to give God the truth about how we're feeling, especially when we're mad or upset, we don't always accompany our honesty with complete trust. But Jesus gave both. He spoke honestly, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me." But even in voicing what he wanted, he ultimately submitted to what God wanted. "Yet not my will, but yours be done." How did he do that? What made it possible for Jesus to speak with complete honesty and complete faith? It's because he knew God. Jesus chose to see his circumstances through what he knew to be true of God, instead of changing what he thought of God based on what he experienced or felt. It's easy to let our own circumstances skew our view of God. When things are difficult and when we're not sure if everything is going to work out, It can feel as if God isn't who we thought he was. It can feel like we're alone or like God isn't listening. But here's the truth. God is who he says he is, regardless of how we feel about him. As strong as our feelings can be, they don't change the unchanging character of the God we worship. That's what Jesus knew in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus knew that even though he felt nervous and frightened and apprehensive, which was all normal emotions for a human being, God was still God. God is always God. God is not defined by circumstances. I think it would be helpful to hear what is true of God. That God is awesome, God is kind, God is merciful, God is beautiful, he is patient, he is always near, God is our sustainer, God is sympathetic, he is our counselor and our deliverer. God is wise, God is our encourager, he is our forgiver, that God is gentle and our helper, that God is capable of anything, God is just, God is righteous, God is victorious and true, and God is unchanging. Those are truths you can take to the bank. Those are truths that Jesus leaned in on in his most difficult hours, and those are the truths that you and I can lean on too. It takes an extraordinary amount of trust in God to face extraordinarily difficult circumstances. And sometimes we think that the level of faith is unattainable, but it's not. It does require believing that God is who he says he is, that what's true of God is actually true of God. And when you believe that and take the time to remind yourself of it every day, it becomes easier to trust in God when circumstances are telling you otherwise. Jesus' famous last words in this prayer are powerful, no doubt. But it wasn't just about his words. It was about his confidence, his courage, and trust in God while he was facing this impossible situation. You and I can learn a lot from Jesus in this moment. There will be a lot of tough nights in our lives, nights where we wonder what God is doing and why, nights where we can't see what God is up to. And in those moments, we can make the choice to, and you can make the choice to, trust who God is, even when you don't understand. Because Jesus knew what God was like. He could trust him no matter what happened. Jesus could face whatever was coming because he could trust completely in who God had shown himself to be. See, our circumstances may not change, and our emotions may not change either. But we do have access to the one who can help us make it through. So what does this mean for us today? Well, for starters, it means we have permission to be real with God. It means we get to pray honest prayers. If Jesus could voice his doubts to God, so can we. God doesn't feel frustrated because of your doubts, and he certainly isn't insecure because you sometimes wonder what's going on. He knows you're human. He made you. He's never going to get frustrated with you for speaking to him honestly. We're like little kids learning how to walk. Parents don't get frustrated when their kids tumble around as they try to figure out how to take those early first steps. The same is true for our Heavenly Father. He just wants to help us walk. But if we don't come to him in the midst of our stumbles, we can't give him the chance to pick us back up. So you can pray to God even when, in fact, especially when you're having a hard time. God wants to hear from you. He wants your honest thoughts, not your perfect prayers. So start there. Speak honestly to God, knowing that he hears you and he won't reject you because of what you have to say. Then we need to get into a habit of reminding ourselves what's true about God. If it helps, make a list and stick it on your mirror or a dashboard or somewhere you'll see it every day. Remind yourself of God's character in the things that are always true of him. Because no matter who you are or where you are on your faith journey, hard days will come. And it will be easy to doubt and to be unsure, and it won't feel like everything is the way you thought it would be. But God will always be God, and it's up to us to remember that, especially when we face hard days and dark nights. For today, the challenge is this: pray honestly and remind yourself of God's character. Where do you feel like life seems uncertain? Or where does life feel pressured? When you figure out the area of your life where it seems like God isn't doing what you thought he would do or what you want him to do, answer this question. What would it look like for you to trust in who God is, even when you don't understand? Jesus was honest, and he relied on what he knew to be true of God, and that's where you and I can start too. You may not understand your circumstances, but you can always trust in a God who loves you and who will never change.